In the 4th month, on the 5th day of the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiakim. Have you ever endured an event so distressing that it restarted your clock? Something like the year the basement flooded, or the year the family lost the farm, or a tragic car accident, or. Now notice that the prophet did not use Jewish names for the month, Abib or Shabbat, nor did he reckon time from the year of the Exodus as his ancestors frequently had done. Something had happened in the lives of Ezekiel and his people that forced him to employ a new numbering system tied to an event that stopped time and started it all over for him and for the people. In the 4th month, on the 5th day of the 5th year of the exile of the king. Have you ever been forced to go through a situation so intense that it made you forget all the other years that had faithfully marched ahead in your life? Or that made you forget your heritage, or even the year you were born? For me, I think of the fire that took my daughter and her family's home March 17th, 2014. Their lives are often measured before the fire and after the fire. In the 4th month of the 5th day of the 5th year of the exile of the king. What kind of event has the capacity to restart a person's historical clock? For some, their memories include the years of the Vietnam War or other wars, or the year that all the planes in America were grounded for days when hijacked planes took down the World Trade Center in New York and damaged the Pentagon in D.C. Or more recently, for those of us here, our time during the year of the COVID pandemic. What was it that reset Ezekiel's clock? Ezekiel was one of the exiles from the Babylonian deportation. The Babylonians exiled the people of Judah in several major waves, ending in 587 BC. Daniel was taken with the first group, and Ezekiel, it was thought, was carried away during the second group, along with the king. Just picture a horrifying sight of a captive king with an entourage of the best and bravest young men of his day. This, of course, was an era when women were not considered a threat at all, but the men were taken from homes, and the women were left to take care of things. They were deported far away. Ezekiel had been carried away with his king, and since that time he had been counting the days. In the 4th month, on the 5th day of the 5th year of the exile of the king. Have you ever been in a situation where you were just counting the days, either after an event or before one coming up? I think of surgery often. We count days before we go into surgery. Or it's life-changing. Mothers, soon-to-be mothers, count the days before their expected pregnancy date. They're not all bad, what we count. But have you ever been in a situation where you were just counting the days? Maybe some of you can remember a time without water. Now, I'm not talking about 2 days without water because the pipes were frozen in winter. I'm talking about being without water because something somewhere about which you'll never receive an explanation happened and the water main was turned off. I read about a missionary who was without water for hours that stretched into days. By the 3rd day without water, she had emptied most of the pots and the barrels that she normally used to store water for just such occasions. By the 6th day, she found herself leaving a little water in the basin when she washed her hands, just in case she would need that water later. All along, she used any wastewater she had from the dishes or the bucket bath that she shared with one other person to flush the toilets. By the seventh day, it was common to go begging at the neighbors' doors or to hit the streets, looking to hire the services of a water truck, hoping secretly that it had already been paid for by somebody else. By the 10th day, when the water finally came, she was dirty, exhausted, and frighteningly conditioned to being without water. Now, when I was out at the retreat center in the Flint Hills, I think it was 2011 or 12, we experienced a drought out there. Actually, there were two of them. I was never totally without water, but there was nothing coming from the faucets at all. Nothing. I was hauling water for bathing and for flushing. I remember the ranch owner, Jane, loaning me two big tanks, 25 and 30-gallon tanks, to go into town to fill up with water. I had to ask my in-town neighbors for water, and I was filling them up about every 10 days. I was younger then, I could handle those tanks a little better. And I was already hauling 5-gallon water jugs for drinking water. I did that the whole 12 years I was out there. But these tanks were so heavy once they were filled, I put them in the back of my little Ford Ranger pickup truck, and when I got them home, I would lay them down. Now this was used for flushing mainly, flushing and bathing. But I'd lay them down at the end of the truck and put the tailgate down, and I'd open up the valve on the tank so that the water would flow between the crack of the bed and the tailgate so that water would flow into a 5-gallon bucket. And then I'd carry the bucket of water into the house. It wasn't fun. I gained a huge appreciation for women water haulers in the world over centuries and centuries. But it was hard work and seemed like an awful long time without water. Ezekiel was counting the days in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the 5th year of the exile of the king. Ezekiel was among the exiles by the river Shabar. Scholars are not unanimous about the location of this river. Some think it may have been the Habar, one of the major rivers in Babylon. Others think it was the site of one of Nebuchadnezzar's magnificent canals that was built with forced labor. Imagine that. It was horrible enough for these people to have been forcibly exiled from their homes and resettled near a river, and then have to build a canal, dig a canal. In this context, the despairing words of Psalm 137 become even more painful to hear. Psalm 137, verses 1 through 4 says, "By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and there we wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung up our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs, and our tormentors asked for mirth, saying, 'Sing us one of the songs of Zion.' How could we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land?" In a sense, this lament was a song. They were singing the blues. I often think of the blues as misery set to music. The blues singers frequently take an unspeakable situation, the chords of which resonate in many hearts and makes music from them. Somehow it seems that the melodic telling and retelling of these offenses make them more bearable somehow. Perhaps the offenses listed in Psalm 137 became more bearable with each telling or with each singing among themselves. The mood, however, was clear. The people bemoaned their condition. What songs do you sing in a bad situation? What do you use to bemoan a bad situation? I'm told that in the Congo, the people sing "Mama, Mama, Mama" when someone dies. Not the same use of mama as we have, but that's what they use for death. Mama, Mama, Mama. This is not so different from the person who says or sings, "Oh my, oh my, oh my, oh my." Maybe your family just says, What do any of us do when something happens that's so big that it shakes our world, displaces or uproots us, restarts our clocks, and makes us aware of little else beside that situation. I remember two songs that I played over and over and over again after experiencing my divorce. Not because of the words in the song, but because of the feeling the music gave me. There was a deep sadness in the tune, and it spoke to my heart in a way that nothing else seemed to at the time. What did Ezekiel do? Ezekiel's testimony is actually encouraging. He wrote, "I was among the exiles by the river Shabar," or the Shabar Canal, "and I saw the Lord." In the same place that others sang laments, Ezekiel saw visions from God. Now, was he crazy or was he insightful? Brazilian author Ruben Alves suggests that faith is daring to dance to the melody of the future. I'm going to say that again. Faith is daring to dance to the melody of the future. Ezekiel danced to visions of God in the midst of the most trouble anyone he knew had ever experienced. Notice that in the worst possible times, he saw the most fantastic vision that anyone had ever seen. If we go on to read in Ezekiel, he says that his vision started out with a cloud and brightness and glowing of a fire. Now, he was familiar with the cloud by day and the fire that glowed by night in the Exodus. But he was seeing that, a cloudiness and a brightness like a glowing fire. And then Ezekiel 1:4 says, "A stormy wind came out of the north." And we Christians are familiar with wind and fire from the day of Pentecost. Ezekiel saw one of the most fantastic creatures that anyone had ever seen. It had straight legs with smooth feet like a calf's. The creature had a human form and 4 faces, each one of them different. Can you imagine people thinking it's crazy seeing these things? There were wings, and there were hands, and there was movement by the Spirit. Can't you see Ezekiel struggling to share this vision with his friends and with anyone who would listen to him? "And they moved," he said, "and this side of its face looked like an eagle's. And did I tell you that it had wings?" I encourage you to look at Ezekiel chapter 1 when you go home or sometime this week, just to see what kind of a vision he had. We live in a world that's hungry for visions of God. 23 years ago, the United States endured the worst tragedy that our country had ever seen. Americans endured something so terrible that it reset our clocks. 9/11/01. 9/11, we know what that means, 9/11. At that time, everything in our immediate world was shaken up. How can we see God in the midst of our pain? How did we see God in the midst of our pain? Helen Keller once said, "The most pathetic person in the world is someone who has sight but no vision." What vision is God offering to us in these post-9/11 years, even 23 years later? What vision do we have to share with others? May I suggest that the present condition of the world is either the worst thing that has ever happened here or the greatest opportunity that the church and Christians have ever had. On the 11th of September 2001, I wasn't even watching TV the morning the world changed. Not until Jane, the ranch owner, called me to tell me that the first tower had been hit. And turning on the TV, together in our own homes, we saw the live telecast of the second plane flying into the World Trade Center tower. I watched alone and in horror as the events of the day unfolded. Exhausted news reporters gasped as a number of people jumped from the tower before it went down, making sounds that continue to haunt many who were there. But thanks be to God, I was also told by my colleagues in ministry that pastors in churches located in lower and middle Manhattan put on their clergy robes, opened up church doors, and took took to the streets to offer hurting people a needed vision of God. They comforted many that had escaped the rubble, prayed with people in the community, and opened their sanctuaries for prayer. And not much later, church members and caring volunteers appeared with water and sandwiches and blankets and supplies for people who were displaced. God's people served. I could stop there. God's people served. God's people served as a visual reminder that God was there, even in the midst of such terrible tragedy. As we live in these post-9/11 years, as we live in these post-COVID years, may I suggest that part of our task is to reflect on the spontaneous reaction of our New York City colleagues and think about how we, both lay and clergy, will continue to offer a fresh, vibrant vision of God to our neighbors, especially those who lately have only seen pain. In the 4th month, on the 5th day of the 5th year of the exile of the king, in the first year after the World Trade Center towers came tumbling down, in the year that the stock markets began to fail and many of our daughters and sons were unemployed, in the year we had of COVID, in those years after 9/11. Yes, 9/11 was a great tragedy, and there have been other hard things we've lived through, nationally, communally, personally. They all continue to present unbelievable opportunities for the church and for individuals. What shall we do? Will we hang our harps by the willows, substituting laments for praise? Or will we offer to work will we work to offer the world a fresh vision of God? We can offer a fresh vision of God to those around us by the way we live, by the things we do and say. What do I have to offer God and our neighbors? What fresh vision is God trying to give you? Is there some mission or ministry, some offering to a neighbor or forgiveness to a family member God is calling you to? Out here in Pretty Prairie, Kansas, we don't have to do big things. And it's difficult to do some big things like we see on the scene in New York, Chicago, in Ukraine, or in Iraq, or in other areas where we only see and know about because of the miracle of television. But we can do little things from Pretty Prairie, Kansas, and you all do them. I see you do them. Over the years I've been here, I've seen you do it, and I encourage you to continue. There are things to do like providing baby items for a couple who couldn't afford to purchase them for their coming newborn child, gathering blankets and tools to help folks who don't have these basic necessities, praying for friends and family and the servicemen and women overseas. There are so many things that we have been doing and we can continue to do as people of the way, as Christians who walk life in the way of Christ. In your bulletin, there's a list of some questions. I was hoping we could have some discussion, but I'm not going to do that. We're getting short of time. But I invite you to look at the questions and maybe ponder them. Maybe talk to somebody about them sometime this week. Questions like, where were you when 9/11 happened? What do you remember from then? How have the events of that day changed your life, if they have at all? Where can you see God at work through the last, say, 5 years or 23 years? How might God be at work in your life, in your future, and what might God be calling you